Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. Now, in this video, we are going to do a pretty informal talk about the 49ers, let's say, quarterback situation, I think is the right way to put it. Of course, in the media in recent days, we've heard John Lynch talk about it. We've heard Kyle Shanahan talk about it. We're going to discuss everything involved. Then I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on who I think should start and why I think that's the case. So I hope you guys stay tuned because this is going to be a whole lot of fun. So the reason why I wanted to make this video and give you guys my thoughts on the quarterback situation is essentially in light of, recent comments made by general manager John Lynch and head coach Kyle Shanahan. So we're going to address what they said, and then I'm going to give you guys basically a breakdown, my thoughts on the quarterbacks and who I think should be the starter kind of going forward for the 49ers. Now, looking at what John Lynch said, and to paraphrase, he essentially said, look, Brock Purdy is the locker room leader at quarterback, and he's earned the right to be the starter with how many games he's won. And, on the surface, it's a little bit difficult to disagree with any of that. Now, of course, we don't really know. None of us fans or content creators know, what the inner workings of the 49ers locker room. But if they're behind Brock Purdy, then that makes sense, to make that comment. And maybe they are behind Brock Purdy. We don't know one way or the other. I think the issue where a lot of what people had with John Lynch, and it's a little bit confusing because just 9 or 10 months ago, the 49ers handed the franchise to Trey Lance. They said this is his team. It's, his team moving forward. And Trey Lance didn't necessarily do anything to lose the team or lose no longer being the franchise, face of the franchise for the 49ers. He had a rough game. Like week 1 was a rough game. The weather, we were missing a lot of weapons. We didn't have McCaffrey at the time, which of course Purdy did. We didn't have George Kittle in that game, which Purdy did. Elijah Mitchell injured in the first quarter, and the weather was just absolutely dreadful, especially in the second half. And then week 2, he gets injured in the first quarter. So it's hard to assess Trey Lance and where he's at. And for me, what I think John Lynch probably should have said is something along the lines of, well, this will be an open competition, may the best man win, and we'll let head coach Kyle Shanahan, the offensive mastermind, basically decide who is the guy who's going to be the leader of our franchise moving forward at quarterback. The fact that John Lynch was so seemingly gung-ho about it being Purdy's team, maybe it was confusing to some people, and to me, it doesn't send a great message to Trey Lance. Trey Lance came in, and I think he knew the situation that we were going to start Garoppolo, and then the next year was going to be his team, and then all of a sudden, pretty much through no fault of his own, the team now that the general manager is saying, well, it's this guy's team now, a rookie who came in, albeit a rookie who played very well. So I think that John Lynch maybe could have managed the media and the questions a little bit better to avoid any unnecessary drama or just awkwardness in the locker room. Now, if you move on to what Kyle Shanahan has said, and again, paraphrasing, is while Brock Purdy's out, it's going to be a competition between Trey Lance and Sam Darnold. Now, I think, and maybe I'm reading too much into all of these comments that these guys are making, but in some ways it is a little bit confusing. You have Sam Darnold, a guy who, the more I've kind of watched him since we've signed him, he's had some really good positive plays, but largely viewed as a pretty big bust. And you're saying, well, the guy that we handed the franchise to, again, 9 or 10 months ago, he's going to compete with a guy who's largely viewed around the NFL as a bust. A little bit confusing. And then also it has that caveat where it's like, well, Brock Purdy's out. Now, to me, I think that, and I love the transparency behind Shanahan and John Lynch, that they're quite open about talking about these things, whereas I think a lot of teams like head coaches, general managers probably would have said just the media answer of like, well, we're gonna let it all play out and we'll see what happens. But I think that's probably what they should have done here, just to avoid any, and now they're just bringing it on themselves, having all these follow-up questions on who's going to be what and all these things. So I just think that my whole thought is that it was a confusing approach that I thought both of these guys had. And I think that in hindsight, they would probably have just said, well, we'll just let the best man win, and you'll see who the starter is come week 1. And that probably would have avoided a whole lot of headaches. So I don't, in some ways, of course, you want to read a lot into what they're saying. You know, we're starving for football news, especially when it comes to the quarterback position. You know, it's a question that's on everyone's mind. But I think at the end of the day, we have to maybe take a step back, and it's so early in the process because we don't know when Brock Purdy is going to be healthy. We don't know what Trey Lance is going to look like coming up from his injury. We don't know what Sam Darnold is going to look like in this offense. So maybe we do have to just be like, look, it's still very early. There's still months and months to go before we're even at training camp. So let's maybe all take, let's all calm down a little bit and let it play out as it will. Now, what I'm going to do, though, in this next part of the video is I'm going to talk about each of the 3 quarterbacks, maybe make a case for each of them, and then give you my opinions on who I think should be the starter moving forward. So let's get into the discussion about the 3 quarterbacks who are on the roster who are under contract for the 2023 season. Now, something to point out, too, is that when you add up the contracts for Lance, for Darnold, and for Purdy, all combined, the cap hit is only $14 million. And that's actually a lot less compared to a lot of starters in the NFL. And a lot of average starters, too, realistically. You look at Daniel Jones, Ryan Tannehill, Jared Goff. These guys are making, in some cases, double what all 3 49er quarterbacks under contract are making. So, to me, regardless of who becomes a starter, I think that all 3 guys are going to be on the roster for the entire season, unless some crazy, ridiculous trade comes in, which I really don't see happening. Now, let's go to Sam Darnold. So to me, he is the least likely guy to be named the starter for the 49ers. He's had a really interesting background. He was really, really young coming out of USC, number 3 overall pick to the Jets. His head coach initially, Todd Bowles, he gets fired after a year. Well, after Darnold's first year, then Adam Gase comes in. That's a complete disaster. He gets traded to Carolina. Matt Rule is the head coach, the offensive, guru there, guru. Then he gets fired. And then it's actually when Steve Wilks, our defensive coordinator now, when he takes over as the interim coach in Carolina, that Darnold actually looks pretty solid. The last 6 games that Darnold played their last season in Carolina, they went 4-2, so they won, twice as many games they lost. Statistically, was pretty solid. Now he comes to San Francisco, a much better coaching staff, way better weapons when you look at it from top to bottom. So I think he's coming to a really good situation. However, I don't think the 49ers in any way brought him in to be the starter or to honestly realistically compete for it. I know what Shanahan said, but to me, they brought him in because he's still young, he's still developing, and honestly, they could potentially see Darnold as a long-term backup option because he's still really young. I don't think he's going to see many snaps this coming season, so you can probably keep him under contract. And something that Sam Darnold has said in interviews, and he's actually spoken very highly of the 49ers, but he speaks very highly of being around great coaches, trying to get into a winning culture. He hasn't been in any winning culture at all in the NFL, and maybe come to the 49ers. That's something that he would like long-term to carve out a career where maybe he'll be given opportunities down the line. But I think overall, very solid signing Sam Darnold is, but realistically not brought here to be the starter. Just hasn't shown enough in his 5 or so years in the NFL. He has flashes, but to me, not enough to really justify a legitimate competition with himself and Trey Lance. Now, moving on to Trey Lance, we kind of know what's happened with him so far. He was taken also number 3 overall by the 49ers. We traded up and we gave up a lot to get this kid. And I still have a lot of faith in Trey Lance. We just haven't really seen him out there. And the funny thing is, again, 9-10 months ago, Shanahan, the franchise is Trey Lance's, and how things can change so quickly in the NFL. So if we look at Trey Lance's rookie year, he started a couple of games. There was, of course, ups and downs, but the big thing with Lance coming out of North Dakota State was that he was very raw. His last year there, he only played 1 game, primarily because of COVID reasons and things of that nature. And we knew going into his rookie year, this was going to be a year we were going to follow the Kansas City formula of, like they had Patrick Mahomes sit for a year behind Alex Smith. We were going to have Trey Lance sit for a year behind Garoppolo. He does get some snaps throughout the year, had really solid moments, had some not so great moments, but again, to be expected from a raw rookie quarterback. Trey Lance, you flash forward then to 2022, Week 1 at Chicago, awful weather, no Kittle. We didn't have McCaffrey at the time. You had, let me see, you had Aaron Banks starting his first game in the NFL. You had Jake Brendel, maybe his third or fourth ever start in the NFL in the regular season. Spencer Burford, rookie interior offensive lineman. You know, weapons, the weather's awful, and it was kind of a recipe for disaster in some ways, although we were able to move the ball at points. It didn't look great. It wasn't a complete disaster, but it didn't look great. But I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons, not necessarily excuses for that. Move to week 2, and we know what happens. Trey Lance gets hurt, breaks the ankle, and then is out for the year. So when I look at this situation, to me, Trey Lance is actually, in my opinion, the most likely player to be the starter for week 1. Brock Purdy. Now, if we go to Brock Purdy, we'll go look a little bit more in depth at Brock Purdy momentarily, but Brock Purdy, he's recovering from his injury. He's going to be reevaluated from the moment from when this is recording in another maybe 2 or 3 months or so. So we have no idea really the progression of that injury. So at this point, I think you have to say that Trey Lance, who was given the keys to the franchise last year, who spent, this will be his 3rd year in the offense, in the system, around primarily all of the same weapons. But think about it this year, especially, he's going to have George Kittle's going to be there. He now has Christian McCaffrey. The offensive line, oh my God, they've actually played a ton of games together now. So I think this is a really good situation for Trey Lance, and I expect him to be better. Of course, you are a little bit concerned about Trey Lance. How does he recover from the ankle? Will he still have the same mobility? Hopefully he does. I don't see why not. He's still a very young guy, so he should have a full recovery. But to me, it has to be Trey Lance is the most likely guy to be the week 1 starter because of the uncertainty surrounding Brock Purdy's injury. Now, if we move on to Brock Purdy, we all know what happened. Lance got hurt, Garoppolo got hurt, Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, comes in against the Dolphins and pretty much performs really well, like really, really solid, really consistent. Had some really bad throws that really should have been interceptions, but you really could say that about any quarterback. But overall, you gotta love what Purdy did coming in. Looked very much in command of the offense. Now, if Purdy was a 5, even maybe a 3, 4, 5-year veteran, without having any of the offseason, I think Purdy would have a chance at competing for the starting quarterback spot with Trey Lance and having a very good shot at maybe even winning it. But I just think it's his 2nd year. He has only played in, 9 games or so. If he doesn't have any offseason, as in no training camp, no preseason, I don't think that you can go with a guy like Brock Purdy in that case, coming off a significant injury to on your throwing arm. I don't think the 49ers would go that route, unless the only way that I think Purdy has a shot at starting week 1 is if he is back at some point, ideally earlier in training camp. He can show what he can do there and also in preseason, and then you maybe feel comfortable enough to have Purdy start week 1. But I just don't think he's going to get the reps, and it's just not going to be realistic to have a guy coming off a rookie year, coming off a significant injury. And I know Trey Lance is also coming off a significant injury, and Purdy has actually started more NFL games than Trey Lance. However, this will be Trey Lance's 3rd full offseason with the 49ers. Brock Purdy may not even have a 2nd offseason realistically in terms of actively practicing. So I think it all comes down to that Trey Lance, not in terms of game starts, but he will just have the reps where I think that it will be very difficult to not go with him. And here's the thing too. If you don't go with Trey Lance as your week 1 starter this coming season, any and all his value done out the window. There's just it's pretty much gone. And Trey Lance may, at that point, if he's not the starter, he doesn't seem like this guy. Trey Lance just seems like an amazing teammate. But would you blame him for them putting in a trade request and be like, you need to trade me because I should be starting? I wouldn't blame him at all if he's not named the starter. And I don't think Trey Lance is going to go to the 49ers and give them that ultimatum beforehand, being like, you need to start me or else I'm going to request a trade. But to me, I think Trey Lance is going to have the reps in the offseason. I think he's going to get better. And you just need to give him more time and give him the starting reins. You were comfortable enough with starting Trey Lance week 1 last year. I don't see why you wouldn't feel the same way this year when you even have more weapons. And maybe, and ideally, you're actually going to ask a little bit less of Trey Lance now that you have an elite running back like Christian McCaffrey, along with all the weapons that we could still potentially add in the draft too. So I have to say that ultimately, I'm going to finish off the video here, that Trey Lance, to me, is the most likely guy to be the starter week 1. The only way I would give Brock Purdy a realistic chance, in my opinion, of course, is if he is able to actively compete in training camp, you know, and get it basically healthy for that, and to be able to participate in some of the preseason games. I think what the 49ers will likely do, and my guess would be that the 49ers, I think they still see a very, you know, bright future for, you know, both of these guys. But let's say if we're talking about Brock Purdy, what I would say is I think he starts the year on injured reserve. He's such a young player. He's only coming into his second year in the NFL. I don't see any point in just throwing him back into training camp so early. Put him on IR, let him rest for another 6 weeks, come back at 100% ready to go, and then if Trey Lance is struggling after 6 weeks, or if Trey Lance gets injured after 6 weeks, then you can have Brock Purdy basically take over. And if Trey Lance gets injured within the first 6 weeks, then, you know, unfortunately that would probably be, you know, the end of his time with the 49ers if he were to suffer another season-ending injury. And of course, also if Brock Purdy were to come in and play as well as he did in his rookie year. But, you know, this was a video that there was so much to unpack. And I wanted to make this video not only because of the comments made in recent days by John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, but I had a lot of thoughts in my mind about the 49ers quarterback situation that I just wanted to get out there, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. So I know this went on a little bit longer than probably what I would have anticipated, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below because it really means a lot, and I want to hear where your guys are at with regards to the 49ers quarterback situation. But yeah, let's sum it up real quick. Darnold here to be the backup, arguably number 3 quarterback. Lance, to me, is the most likely guy to be the starter week 1 of the 2023 season. Purdy, the only way I think he could be the starter week 1 is if he is fully cleared at some point, ideally early in training camp, and can actually realistically get reps in the offseason. My prediction would be Trey Lance is the starter week 1, Sam Darnold is the backup, Brock Purdy's put on IR to get him enough time to come back fully healthy, and then we probably have like an undrafted rookie free agent quarterback as the number 3 guy until Purdy comes off the IR. But just wanted to give you guys a little summary right there. But yeah, again, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the content, do drop a like on the video. It means a lot, really helps out. And subscribe to the channel too, and we are going to be doing some more draft videos coming up in the next few days to few weeks. Draft right around the corner, so stay tuned for that. But before I head out, guys, you know I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.